Welcome to the Physician's Guide to Doctoring, a practical guide for practicing physicians, where Dr. Bradley Block interviews experts in and out of medicine to find out everything we should have learned while we were memorizing Krebs cycle. The ideas expressed on this podcast are those of the interviewer and interviewee and do not represent those of their respective employers.
On today's episode, we interview Dr. John Ramey, a fellowship-trained allergist in Charleston, South Carolina, and the creator of drmoves.com. That's Dr. Moves. And I know what you're thinking. The doctor of dance moves. Okay, that's probably not what you were thinking. That's what I was thinking. But Dr. Moves helps doctors to move. He and his wife are real estate agents who own healthyrealty.com, and he walks us through why you may or may not want to buy a home as a resident, how to do it, and if you don't buy one then, how to buy one as a new attending. We discuss what doctor loans are and why you may want to utilize them, and then we walk through the entire process from finding a real estate agent to closing costs. And we really just scratch the surface, and he offers much more detail on his website, again, drmoves.com. He also has useful information on real estate investment and other revenue streams for physicians, like being a medical reviewer, expert witness, medical surveys, telemedicine, and locums jobs. Welcome back to the Physician's Guide to Doctoring. On today's episode, we have Dr. John Ramey of drmoves.com. He has a fantastic website that gives all sorts of information to physicians about finding a real estate agent, finding a home, earning extra income through either real estate or medical surveys, becoming a medical reviewer. Really, he has lots of different information, is a wealth of information for physicians. But today we're going to focus on buying a home. So if you're a physician or you recently became a physician because you recently matched, or you're finishing residency, you're about to become an attending, you know where you're going to be living for a while, and you're thinking of buying a home. As a physician, you might have some other obstacles like your loans that other people don't, and there might be some more resources available to you that aren't available to other people, like a physician-specific loan. And so Dr. Ramey has some particular expertise in this area for a whole host of reasons. So first of all, Dr. Ramey, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be on with you tonight.
So I think your real estate experience first started with your experience as you were starting your residency and you were looking your first home. So can you walk us through what happened there?
Yeah, it was actually getting ready to start medical school. So my fiance at the time, we were wanting to buy a house, and like most medical students, we didn't have any money. We had just graduated from college, and so we went to look for houses with my in-laws. So first suggestion I have is don't go look for houses with your in-laws. It wasn't a very good experience. So we were actually staying at a resort, and the closest real estate office was a resort real estate office. The second mistake we made was finding a realtor who was used to selling $1 million properties, which we were not looking for at the time. So she took us out for the day, and we were looking in the $100,000 range at that time. We actually found a house that we really liked, and this was just after one day of looking. And so the realtor takes us back to our office, and she goes into a spiel saying, "Hey, listen, this is a seller's market. If you don't put an offer on this house today, you're probably going to lose it. You need to do something quick." And I was very nervous, being my first house, never buying a house. I wanted to call my parents and get some advice from them. And my parents are kind of cautious. They said, "Hey, John, don't you really want to think about this overnight? I don't think you should rush into this." And so, I agreed with them. I wasn't in a big hurry to do this. So I walked back into the room with the real estate agent and my in-laws, and I told them, I said, "Listen, I want to think about this tonight. I want to, make sure this is a good decision." Well, the realtor got really upset with me and said, "You are going to lose this house tonight. This is a terrible decision." And she stomped out of the room. The next person got upset with me with my mother-in-law. She stomped out of the room. And my fiance at the time was crying. It was just a bad real estate experience. And from that experience, my wife and I talked about it several years later, and we were just like, man, we could have done such a better job ourselves. And it, inspired us to go get both of us to get our real estate license.
So you got a real estate license while you were a medical student?
No, it was actually after I finished up all my training, I got mine. My wife got hers during my fellowship, and so she got it before me, and so she was able to help us buy this was our, I think, third house by that time when we moved to our my final job as an attending.
Your third house?
Yes.
So the first house ended up happening at the beginning of medical school?
Well, what ended up happening, that house that we were going to buy, we didn't buy, and we decided to rent instead. So we ended up renting a townhouse for the first 2 years. Then we went to the owner and said, "Hey, we'd really like to buy this," and bought it during the end of my second year of med school, and sold it 2 years later for a profit. And then went on to residency, bought a house there. Ended up breaking even on that one, and then during fellowship, bought another house and ended up making a good profit on that house. And that was during the time my wife got her real estate license. So it was actually our fourth house that we ended up using her as the realtor.
So you're buying and selling these houses. You're not holding them as rental properties.
Not at that point, we weren't. And, that's, one piece of advice that, I would make to residents or attendings is, look at, the property you're buying. It may, be a good rental property over the long term. And that's not something I was looking at that point in my career.
Yeah, actually, when I was a resident, I bought an apartment, and my parents helped me to finance it because the first apartment that I lived in Washington wasn't in the best area. So when I would leave at 5:30 in the morning to go to my rotations, there were still hookers outside. So
oh my goodness,
they helped me to put a down payment on a place, But I was a resident from 2006 to 2011, so possibly the worst time to buy an apartment. And then at the end, we just we didn't want to, because I was moving back from Washington D.C. to New York. We didn't want to be long distance landlords, so we decided to just sell it and took the loss. But in retrospect, it might have been a better idea to hold on to that and use it as a rental property, because that place, it had so many amazing things about it. And I think that gets to something we're going to end up talking about later, is there are some inefficiencies in the real estate market that you can capitalize, meaning like the stock market is supposed to be completely efficient. Everybody has all the same information at all the same time. But the real estate market, if you're going to be living in a place for a while, you're really going to be invested in looking at a lot of places and doing your research and doing your due diligence until you end up deciding on a place. And that research has some value to it. So if you hold on to it, you might be able to find something that is undervalued or underpriced, and then turn it into something.
Yeah, you're exactly right. So, we got our real estate my wife got a real estate license around 2003. I got mine around 2005. And like you said, the real estate market crashed around the 2006, 2007 period. And, we dealt with a lot of residents, especially who bought during those years. And, it was real hard for them because they, like you, had graduated and they had to make a decision, should they sell their house for a loss, or should they keep it and hopefully hold out until the pricing had recovered? And most of them actually ended up selling for a loss because, like you, they were moving away. They didn't want to have to keep managing it from a distance. But a funny story: we had a resident who kept their townhouse, and he is just selling it now from that 2006, 2008 time period, and he's actually finally, able to make a little bit of profit after all those years. So he kept it and rented it, out to help it recover back to its baseline.
Yeah, so there are ways that even if something like that happens, hopefully it won't be for some extremely extended period of time to protect yourself against loss. But there is, like any investment, there's going to be some risk involved. So your wife is a real estate agent, you're a real estate agent, and your website, Dr. Moves, you named it Dr. Moves presumably because you help doctors to move, correct?
Correct. So So I joined an allergy practice in Charleston, South Carolina in 2006. And at that same point, my wife and I started our real estate company in Charleston, South Carolina. We called it Healthy Realty. And initially, we really just focused on helping doctors relocate and did that mainly for the first few years. But as the company began to grow, we started doing a lot more online advertising, and we grew to where we were helping anybody buy houses. We did a lot of Zillow advertising over the years, and that really took us to another level in the real estate company. But with all that, we probably have worked with over 200 physicians in the Charleston area over the last 10 years. And a few years ago, we started to think, we've learned a lot through this experience, how physicians are different than other buyers and sellers, and learned a lot about doctor's loans. And we said, hey, we can teach the same thing that we've been teaching people in Charleston for years, through a website that helps people relocate nationally. And so that's kind of how DR Moves came about, was from just our experience in the Charleston market. We kind of wanted to share it with people across the U.S.
So let's say you have a med student that just graduated from MUSC, and he spent some time with you in the allergy office, and he comes to you for some advice saying he's moving to X city for residency, and he's thinking of buying a house there. What are the steps that you're going to take that physician through to make sure that they're making the best decision for them?
Yeah, so that's something I have a lot of passion about, and I've been doing that for about 10 years. I've actually been lecturing the students at the Medical University of South Carolina on that, decision process. And, the first thing I encourage them to do is sit down and make a budget. I mean, that's the best thing you can do before you start thinking about whether to buy or rent, is sit down and make a budget. Figure out, what is your salary going to be after taxes? How much money is going to be left over? And then figure out, are you going to start paying on your student loans or not? And then figure out, what's your other costs going to be, and kind of figure out, how much money you're going to have left over for housing costs, whether that's to buy or rent. One of the worst decisions, I've seen with residents is getting in a house that they can't afford. I mean, there's nothing worse than having all the pressures of residency and having to worry about, can I make my house payment every month? And so the way to, avoid that, and again, that can go with buying or renting, is just to sit down and, figure out what your budget is. And there's a lot of great online resources to help you do that. So once you figure that out, the next step, I think, is, to figure out, do you want to buy or rent? And I think, there's definitely, we always, with the people we work with, we try to, get them to make the best decision for each person, because each person is different. Like you said, you went to Washington, D.C., so a lot of times it's harder for people in these big cities to afford properties on a resident salary. So that's one of the first things to figure out. Can I afford a property close enough to the hospital? And some cities you can, and some cities you can't. And then, after that, the next thing to ask yourself is, do I want to deal with the problems of, owning property? Because, owning property is always something to deal with. And, there are some people out there who like dealing with that kind of stuff, and there's some other people that don't. And so if you're one of these people that would not enjoy dealing with a HVAC system breaking, one of the things that happened to me in residency with the house that we bought, I don't want to run a way rotation, and a pipe popped out on the second floor of our house, and we had water coming down from the second floor to the first floor to our basement. And we had our next door neighbor call me while I was on a way rotation and say, "Hey, John, you may want to come back. You have water flowing out of your basement." And we had about $100,000 worth of damage, and we had to move out of our house for 3 months during the middle of residency.
Oh,
Fortunate
wow.
thing was that we had homeowners insurance, and it covered everything except the $1,000 deductible. But still, it was a big headache, and having to deal with that, it's not fun during residency.
I actually had something similar happen to me. I had a leak. I had a leak. I was the fifth floor of an apartment building, and there was a leak. But I was there. There was a leak coming out of the sink, from under the sink,
Oh,
and
wow.
right where the valve is. So I tightened the valve, and then it got worse. And I thought maybe I'm just an idiot, and I turned the valve the wrong way. So I turned it the other way, and it got worse. So every time it got worse, and it got worse because the leak was between the wall and the valve.
Oh, wow.
So ultimately the place is flooded. Someone ended up calling the fire department, and they came in and they just crimped the pipe. Um, Maybe I should have known to do that, but the panic was not helping, and there ended up being quite a bit of damage to the place. And in New York, where I'm from, you can't buy a place without homeowners insurance. They won't let you. In Washington, D.C., they do. So I assumed, just like in New York, it was just rolled into the mortgage. It was not. I had no homeowners insurance. That was a big problem.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So, that's one thing you got to, look into when you're buying a home. You got to make sure that you get homeowners insurance, and then, know your deductible. Because again, on a resident salary, if you have $1,000 deductible or $2,000 deductible, you need to make sure that you can afford that. If you, have, something catastrophic happen like flooding or fire or a hurricane, anything like that, you just want to make sure that you can afford that if you, decide to buy a property.
Is there any good formula, like a quick and dirty for the resident salary, what you think would be a reasonable amount to spend? I know it's a personal decision, but certainly there are some for like 40% of gross or something like that.
Yeah, the one that I hear a lot is somewhere between 30 to 35% of your net. If you're wanting to put money away for retirement or other things, all those decisions enter in, and it affects you and the amount you're willing to spend for a house. The mistake, I see residents make when they're looking for houses, there are many of them that want to buy their final home during residency. And, what you're really looking for, I think, during residency is not your final home, but either a home that you can sell when you move in 3 to 5 years, or, a home that's going to be a good investment that could be a good rental property. And, the nicest properties out there don't always meet that eligibility. So, again, I think those are things you want to really listen. You want to find a good real estate agent, first of all, who can help you make a good purchase. You don't want to buy a house probably on a major road. You don't want to buy a house with heavy traffic. You want to buy a house that, is going to be easy to sell. I mean, if a house has been on the market for a year, there's probably some reasons why other people haven't liked it. And so you got to ask those hard questions. Is there something about this house that's going to make it hard to sell when I need to resell it?
So let's say you decide that it's the right thing for you. You want to buy it. Let's talk about financing. What are the different options for either someone about to start residency or someone who just became an attending? Because I think a lot of the advantages of the physician-specific loans are, they don't count the debt and less of a down payment. So if you've been an attending for a couple of years, those advantages usually go away. So let's talk about someone who needs to take advantage of a physician-specific loan or an FHA loan. Or maybe they're a veteran, they might have those options available. What are the different options, and why would you choose one over another?
Yeah, so let's start with doctor loans. So the thing to understand about doctor loans, most of the doctor loans, like you stated, don't take into account educational debt. If the loan did take into account educational debt, many residents would not be able to buy a house because their debt to loan value would be way too high. So one of the advantages of doctor loans, they don't take that into account. Another advantage of a doctor loan is that you can get 100% financing. So most residents have not saved money to where they can put down a decent down payment. Typically with most loans, you have to put down a minimum of 3% down payment, and that's not including your closing costs. So again, you have to have a 3% saved to be able to do that. The other nice thing about a doctor's loan is that you avoid private mortgage insurance. You hear the term PMI, that's private mortgage insurance. And that is a fee that's tacked onto your loan until you have 20% of the loan paid off. So if you're able to put down 20% down payment, you can avoid PMI. But the nice thing about a doctor's loan, you have no PMI starting at 100%. So typically, for most, residents that have not saved any money, the doctor's loans are probably the way to go. Now, if you have money saved up and you're able to put down a down payment, then you definitely want to look at the other type of loans too to see if you can get a better rate or a better deal.
And the reason that they have this PMI is because if you're not putting down much, then you're considered higher risk. So the way that they mitigate this risk is by charging you more. But historically, doctors are a safe bet. And correct me if I'm wrong, the national default rate is somewhere a little over 4%, whereas for doctors, it's somewhere between 0.2 and 0.4%. Is that correct?
I don't know those stats. I mean, I agree with you that they're a lower risk, but again, like you said, the whole point of the mortgage insurance goes back to the mortgage crash, back in 2007, 2008. That PMI helped protect the banks when people could no longer pay their monthly mortgage payments, and you started seeing foreclosures and short sales. So it's to protect the bank in the end.
So you're paying for their insurance against the risk that they're taking on you.
Correct.
Okay. Interesting. So are there any other advantages to taking a doctor loan, or it's those are the two, the no down payment and the lack of PMI?
And then like you said, not taking into educational debt. But I mean, those are the three main advantages. Sometimes with doctor loans, the rates are higher because of that. So, many times if you're able to put money down, you may be able to get a better rate. So that's why, you want to look at other products if you can, because you may be able to get better rates and better terms. The mistake that anybody makes looking at a house, they just look at the rate. You also have to look at what the bank's charging you in points and other expenses, because sometimes the reason you have a low rate is because they're charging you all of the fees. So it's kind of the whole package. You got to look at everything. You can't just look at the rate and making your decision on which loan to go with.
So they mitigate their risks in another way. You're saying if they have higher interest rates for you, then you might not have to pay. They might be ignoring your loans, not having to pay PMI, but now they're charging you a higher interest rate in order to mitigate those risks, make it a
correct
better deal for them. Okay, that's interesting. Or they'll just hide that in fees.
Correct. So you just have to, look at the total picture. That's what you have to do with, all these loans. And the other thing that's really important, during residency, most people know how long they're going to be in a town. So let's say you're doing an ENT residency. You're going to be in a town for 5 years. Well, you have the choice when you're getting the loan, whether you're going to do an adjustable rate mortgage, which is known as an ARM, or a fixed rate. And, I'm personally a big fan of the adjustable rate mortgages. Most likely you're only going to be in a city for a certain amount of time. So, for example, ENT, you're going to be there 5 years. I personally would like a 7-year ARM rather than like a 5-year ARM. Because the 5-year ARM, if something happens and you decide to stay a little bit longer, you got a chance that your rate can go up. The 7-year hedges your bets a little bit and gives you a little bit more time if something changes, and you need a little bit longer with that loan for whatever reason. So I like the adjustable rate mortgages because the rate's usually lower than the fixed rate. And again, if you're only going to be in the area for short term, then I think they can be a good choice.
Could you just describe what an adjustable rate mortgage is? So if a fixed rate mortgage, you have the same interest rate for the life of the loan, and that's it, right? And so when you take out
correct,
many mortgage, my mortgage on my house is, we have a 30-year mortgage, it's a fixed rate mortgage. But for the adjustable rate mortgage, how does that work?
Yeah, so I'll start again with the fixed rate. So the fixed rate mortgage, the type of ones that most people get is usually the 30-year fixed or 15-year fixed. So the rate of the loan is fixed over 15 years or 30 years. Typically, with the fixed rate, the rates are a little bit higher than the adjustable rate mortgages. With the adjustable rate mortgages, you have products that are 3-year adjustable rates, 5 years, 7 years. And typically, the shorter the term, the lower the rate. So you're going to get a better rate. So let's take a 5-year adjustable rate mortgage. So you're going to get the same rate for the first 5 years. And then after that 5 years, your rate is going to adjust. So if interest rates have stayed the same from when you got the loan, it's probably not going to change much. If they've gone down, they may go down. The big risk is when they go up. So if you get into a period when rates go up dramatically from the beginning of when you get your loan, you could really see a big change. They typically have caps with each loan, so you want to understand what the cap is, how much. But again, that's where you really can get hurt if you still need that mortgage. You can always, with an adjustable rate mortgage or a fixed rate, you can refinance it if needed. But again, the cost with that, may outweigh the benefit. So again, it's a numbers game to figure all that out.
But that sounds like it makes sense for someone who's going to have, like you said, an ENT residency is 5 years long. You can lock in a lower rate than a fixed rate for those 5 years on the adjustable rate mortgage. And then when you're done, even if the rate goes up, either you sell the property, or at that point, you're making an attending salary. So even if the rate goes up, it won't be as devastating as if you were still making a resident salary.
Yeah. And I think what you want to ask yourself, you want to ask yourself some hard questions when you're deciding on the product. One is, do you think you want to get rid of this house when you leave? So if you know, hey, I'm definitely not going to want to keep this house, and either if I stay in this town, I want to get a bigger, better house, then adjustable rate probably makes sense. The other question to ask yourself, like we talked about earlier, do I want to start building my portfolio of passive properties, and do I want to make this into a rental property? If you want to make this into a rental property when you finish up, then it probably makes a lot more sense to get a fixed rate mortgage, so you know what your costs are going to be throughout the whole term. So if you can ask yourself those questions, it will help you a lot in deciding whether you should get an adjustable or fixed rate mortgage.
And for those that are listening that thinks that is just a crazy idea, holding onto a property and renting it out, since you're listening to this podcast, you probably listen to other podcasts, and there are plenty out there about the benefits of real estate investment, and you can find a company to manage the property for you for a fee. So like Dr. Ramey said, it's a great way to start building a portfolio, because then you have passive income through that property. Another thing that's discussed on the physician-specific podcasts and blogs is living like a resident. So it actually makes sense when you become an attending to not spend like an attending immediately. So if you're in your resident apartment or resident house, it actually makes sense to stay there for a couple of years, continuing to live like a resident before you try and find that big, beautiful house. And we had the frugal physician on a couple of episodes ago where she talked about what happens when you try and buy that big, beautiful house so quickly and how stressful that can be. So, this is not how a lot of people think when they're starting in residency. I'm going to start accumulating a portfolio of investment properties, but there are tons of benefits to having that mindset.
Yeah, unfortunately, I see that a lot. There's a lot of, a delayed gratification in our field that, we tell ourselves we've worked so hard for all these years. We deserve, this nice car. We deserve this nice house. And I think from an investment standpoint, that's a surefire way to not get rich or to build your wealth is to, thinking that, I think a better way to think, if you want to build your wealth, if you want to take, the FIRE principle, which is, financial independence, retire early, think more like you're saying, is this a good investment? And, would it make more sense for me to, when I buy my second house, to get one that's a lesser cost so I can keep this rental property and start seeing some passive income accumulate?
So let's say you've found the apartment or you found the property, you want to, this is where you want to live for residency, but you have so little money in the bank. Just because you're not making a down payment doesn't mean there's no upfront costs. So talk to me about what those upfront costs are, even when you're talking about zero down payment.
Yeah. So a lot of people, when you buy your first house, you don't realize that, there are closing costs associated with buying a house. And, typically those closing costs can run around 3% of the house's value. One thing you can do with these closing costs, if you have a good realtor, you can ask the sellers to pay the closing costs. So if you don't have cash where you can afford to pay that, you can ask the sellers to pay your closing costs. Typically, let's say that your closing costs are going to be $5,000. You ask the seller to pay the $5,000. And in exchange for that, the seller may want to increase the price of the house for $5,000. So that's okay. It's kind of, you're paying just, you're getting them to help you pay for that. And, a lot of residents are in that scenario. They just don't have money to, pay closing costs for down payment. So that's one thing to think about, that, if you're saying, hey, I really want to buy, but I don't have any money, saved up, that's one way, to be able to do that.
That seems a little shady that you don't have the money for closing costs and you're still there because it's getting wrapped up into your mortgage. So the seller is still getting their $5,000. You're just paying them. Basically, they're loaning you that $5,000 because you're wrapping it up into the cost of the mortgage, and then they're paying those upfront costs. I guess that works. I guess it's not so shady now that I think about it.
Well, I mean, there's, it's two ways to look at it. One way, a lot of financial advisors will say, that's a good way to do it. Roll that $5,000 into your loan. You're paying 4 to 5% on it. That's not, high interest rate if you look at historically. And, a lot of them would say that, you can invest your money and do with that. Other people, financial advisors, would say if you don't have that $4,000 to $5,000, you probably shouldn't be buying a house. So, there's two sides of the coin and people look at it differently. So it really, depends on, the way you invest and, making that decision.
And let's say you bought your house during residency and now you've become an attending, because you've made so little, you've been living hopefully not paycheck to paycheck, but close to it. So you don't have much in savings. Now you've got this bump in salary and you want to buy a second property now that you've become an attending and you still have the loans. Could you use a second physician loan? Is that possible?
It is. And if you go to our site, drmoves.com, we've written some articles on that topic. But there are certain banks that will let you use doctor loans to buy investment properties and second homes. Not all the banks do that, so there are only certain ones that will allow you to do that. But it is possible, and we have a list of banks that will allow you to do that.
Okay, so you're in Charleston. So let's say I'm starting my residency in Tallahassee. How do I find a real estate agent?
So one of the things we've tried to do with DR Moves is make it easy on doctors to find a real estate agent. Going back to my initial story, we made the mistake of not asking other people for references of the realtor. So, a minimum, you need to talk to people who live in that town and say, hey, who did you use? Did you have a good experience? Even better than that, if you're a physician, talk to other physicians. Because again, there, in our town of Charleston, we have, about 6,000 houses on the market, and we have about 4,000 realtors. And so there's about, almost one realtor per house. And so they're everywhere. And so not all the realtors in Charleston know anything about working with a physician. So as a physician, what you really want to do is find a realtor who has experience working with physicians, because it is different. There's many realtors out there that don't know anything about doctor loans. And again, it's good to have a realtor out there who understands the difference between a doctor loan and a regular loan. So what we've done at DR Moves is we have made it easy on people. Pretty much they can send us an email, call us up, and we'll match them with a realtor in whatever city they're going to. And what we've done is we go and interview the realtors before and find out how many doctors they work with. We look at some of their reviews, and again, we try to find realtors who have a lot of real estate, kind of like I do with a doctor. You want to, if you're going to have a knee replacement, you don't want somebody that's just done 5 knee replacements. You want somebody that's done a lot of knee replacements. Same thing with real estate. You don't want a realtor who has just started in the profession. You want somebody who has done a lot of transactions, because the thing about real estate is that, for many transactions, you may not need a realtor, but when you get into a bad situation, you don't know what to do. The realtor's worth their weight in gold to say, hey, this is what we need to do to get you out of this bad situation. Having a realtor with experience is worth its weight in gold. I'll share a story with you. We were working with a resident who had a contract to buy a newly built house. It was about 5 days away from closing on the house. The house got hit by lightning and caused significant damage to the electrical system. So again, you're buying your first house. What do you do? If you working with your aunt who's a realtor that maybe sells one house a year, they're probably not going to be too much of help to you. But if you're working with a realtor who does, over 100 transactions a year, they probably run into something similar, or at least they know people who can give you good advice on how to deal with that situation.
And then I see you also have a resource on the website for finding doctor loans based on your region.
Yeah, so you can go and search by state what companies do doctor loans, and compare rates. So most states have multiple banks doing that, and then we have there are also I think this program is mainly focused on doctors, but we have found banks that will do them for pharmacists and physical therapists and other medical professions out there. So in general, the doctor loans are for physicians, but there are some out there for other medical professionals too.
And I see you have a couple of other sources on your website that I think bear mentioning. If you want to discuss those briefly, filling out medical surveys, becoming a medical reviewer, unrelated to real estate, but certainly very helpful.
Yeah. So what we're trying to do with that too is, all that stuff's kind of associated with the process of moving. You're looking for jobs, you're looking for ways to make extra income. And I've been doing medical surveys now for over 15 years, and accumulated, large list of companies that do this. And, we've had a list on there, and, what you have to do is just go and sign up with each company. And I always get the question of, well, how do I decide which company to sign up? What I did when I was in residency, I signed up with most of them. And what I found is that, certain companies work with certain specialties more than others. So it's good to be signed up with multiple ones. And, you can earn significant, spending cash doing these surveys. Over the years, I've earned probably $10,000 to $15,000 a year doing these surveys. So, depending on your specialty, there's definitely a need for people doing surveys. We also have information on about doing medical reviews, telemedicine, and other ways to earn extra income. Expert witnessing is something else that we have on there.
Is there anything else that you wanted to mention that we didn't discuss yet today?
No, I think the main thing that I want to go back to is preparing. When you decide that you want to buy a house. Again, it's a very emotional decision, and many doctors get out there and they buy houses that they can't afford or are too expensive at their time and training. And when the banks qualify you for a loan, they're not always looking at your budget to see what you can afford to pay for. They're always giving you the maximum they think you can afford. And so again, that doesn't mean that it's going to be comfortable for you if you go with the maximum they're recommending. So, to make a good decision, you always want to sit down and think about a budget.
Yeah, they recognize that your likelihood of defaulting is extremely low. But as you're avoiding default, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're not miserable because you're stressing over not only the mortgage payments, but all the upkeep that goes along with having a more expensive home. So as long as you're making your payments, they're they're fine. They're not invested in some of the misery that's associated with living paycheck to paycheck. So I think that's an excellent point.
And again, if you're married, you want to think, long term too. Do you and your spouse both want to work? Because if you get pre-qualified on both your salaries, and one of the people decide to stay home, it may be very hard to maintain that payment. So again, you want to think, hey, am I going to start having kids in 3 to 5 years? And what am I going to do with that? So again, if those people come to work, then that's great. But again, if you have the plan that one person wants to stay home, you want to try to make your initial decision on that, not on both people's salaries.
Well, Dr. Remy, where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can go to send me an email at info@drmoves.com. Happy to answer any questions. Again, we just want to be a resource. I've been very blessed in my career, and I feel like one of the things we didn't talk about, but been very fortunate at making good real estate decisions, and have investment properties that are residential, commercial, and even vacation rentals. And, it's been nice to get to a point to be able to pay off a lot of those properties and already seeing them, be cash flow positive. And so it's nice to get to a point in your career where you work because you want to, not because you have to. And, that's where, I feel like I am at this point. And, I'm only 45. And so, I see that as a blessing. So again, the reason I was able to get there was the decisions I made when I was 32 and 33 and 34. Making good decisions then will pay off in your 40s and 50s. So you just got to think about, just making great decisions, when you're going into being an attending.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk on the podcast, and it has been very informative, and it's been a pleasure.
Thanks. It was a great talking to you tonight.
That was Dr. Bradley Block at the Physician's Guide to Doctoring. Find all previous episodes on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, and write us a review. You can also visit us on Facebook at facebook.com/Physician's Guide to Doctoring. If you are interested in being a guest or have a question for a prior guest, send a message or post a comment.